And we're live.
Oh, you said they're not like
Why
that.
is her eyebrows?
Oh, no.
Right
She's
here.
got nice eyebrows.
Yes. Ooh, you need
You're
some
on the air.
puffy
Hello,
eyebrows.
Facebook friends. This is Chad Rudolph at our home Bible study
Is the
in
guy
Kaiser,
back
Oregon.
from last time? Is he back?
Hey, Jason, if you're there, say hi to your beautiful wife and children.
That's awkward.
Someone said that was awkward. Okay, don't say hi to them.
Everything's awkward to teenagers. Whose boot is this and why is it in my hand?
It's your booth.
Pass the donation boot, fireman boot. Isaiah chapter 19, we're in the middle. Verse 16 is where we'll start. So in the first half of Isaiah 19 was about Egypt's decline and collapse. Remember, we talked about the Nile River drying up and how that would cause ecological and financial disaster, and there wouldn't be any work, and the plants wouldn't grow, the crops wouldn't grow. And we've already seen, it seems like that is starting because of the Aswan Dam and the Gerd Dam, which Aswan is the one Egypt built in the 70s and 80s.
Ashwan. Yeah.
Yeah. What did I say?
That's the same. Number one.
And it's been a total disaster because it's just filled with mud or silt.
Right.
And then because of the heat, it evaporates the water really fast that they're saving in the new lake or a what reservoir it's created.
Like Nasser.
Nasser, yeah.
And it doesn't allow the Nile to expand out and contract and make new soil.
Right, so it's 25% lower. It doesn't flood every year, which is what fed the crops and brought that silt nutrients to the land and kept the ocean at bay in the Nile Delta. And it's ruined the fishing industry too, and cotton and all the other stuff. So it's no more bed sheets for the rich.
My pillow bed sheets?
What? They're famous for their high thread count bed sheets. Yeah. Egyptian cotton.
That's right.
So,
That's right, boys.
Isaiah 19. So we kind of ended on a downer with their judgment and decline and collapse. But the rest of the chapter is good news. So my pericope says, future restoration of Egypt and Assyria as subject to Israel in Christ's kingdom. So the first half of the chapter was about Egypt's collapse, and this half is about Egypt's conversion. Verse 16, in that day, Egypt will be like women and will be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand of the Yahweh of hosts, Yahweh of armies. Oh, stop it.
God is a sexist?
Which he waves over it. So the brave Egyptians, yes, will be like girly men. In that day when Assyria comes, yeah, they'll just be frozen, shaking in their boots. Yeah, their knees will be knocking when the Assyrians come knocking. So it starts off with in that day. What does that mean?
The day of the last day, the day of Armageddon.
Yeah, the last days, the time around Christ's return. The time around the return of the Lord. So usually we're talking tribulation time period, but sometimes it's talking about that's before his return, but sometimes it's talking about after, which is the kingdom, and the context usually tells you which is which. If it's positive, it's the kingdom period. If it's negative, it's the judgment of the tribulation period, the 7 years versus how long is the kingdom.
1,000 years.
Yes, 1,000 years.
Or a millennium.
Yeah, millennium. Oh, and I was going to say that the GERD dam that Ethiopia's building and Egypt and Sudan hate, because see, that's on the Blue Nile River that feeds the Nile into those other two countries and then the Mediterranean. I said the Egyptian fishing fleets were pretty much gone, decimated because of this. Well, they're going to be holding back even more water and get dependent on that electricity. They're still building it, but it's already in use and producing lots of electricity, and they're going to build it higher and higher. And Egypt, well, there was some, I don't know if ambassador or Egyptian official where they're having a meeting about this dam negotiations or something, and he thought the mic was off, and he said, "We're going to go to war over this."
Wow.
And they weren't supposed to hear that, but it went live on the air. Kind of like when our presidents have done that a few times, said something and the mic's still on. And so, oh, and
Like
what was...
Brandon just did.
Oh, I don't remember what you're talking about, but what was the old name for the Ethiopian GERD Dam, which means Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam? That's the new name for it, but what was it originally called?
Kushite Dam?
The Millennium Dam.
Oh.
The Millennium Dam, or Millennial, whatever, Millennium Dam, I think it is, which I think that's odd. We have this prophecy about Israel, the Nile drying up, and then this dam that's connected with 1,000 years. I guess it's supposed to last 1,000 years, and they said to fill up the lake behind it, the reservoir behind it. Guess how long that'll take before it fully makes Egypt really mad? 7 years. So you have 7 years to fill up the reservoir of this new dam, and then it's supposed to last for 1,000 years. That fits pretty well with Bible prophecy.
The Nazis were going to last 1,000 years too.
Yeah, well, they thought they were Third Reich, isn't that like third millennium or
No, Third Reich is kingdom.
third kingdom? Yeah, so
But it's supposed to be the 1,000-year Reich.
so they think they're the kingdom. They thought they were the kingdom on earth, and so apparently Hitler was an antichrist.
That's
So in verse 1, in that day Egypt will be like women and will be afraid and fear because of the waving of the hand of the Yahweh of hosts. What's this waving thing like? How y'all you Egyptians down there doing?
No, he also talked earlier about his hand of judgment, like the...
Right, the context is the Assyrian. The Assyrian is the rod in his hand. So that's his weapon, or his disciplining tool, and he's going to beat Egypt with the rod of Assyria, which he waves over it. Verse
Spare the rod,
17.
spoil the child.
Yep. Verse 17, and the land of Judah will be a terror to Egypt. Everyone who makes mention of it will be afraid in himself because of the counsel of the Yahweh of armies, which he has determined against it. So, the land, why would the land of Judah be a terror to Egypt around the time of before Christ's coming? Well, there's another scripture that talks about the tribulation period. It talks about the governors of Judah being like firebrands, and one of their fighters being like King David, and another one being like 100 of his enemies. So, and I think it's already happened. I mean, why was Egypt, Israel's sworn enemy, why were they willing to make peace?
Because there's somebody bigger and badder.
Because Israel put them down in their place, not only when they got attacked by Egypt and multiple other Arab or Muslim countries. They took the whole Sinai Peninsula, a huge section of Egypt, and they took out their air force and everything, and Egypt's like, oh, these guys are a bunch of firebrands. We better make peace with them.
Was that the war where they only had like 3 days to prepare for, or less than?
I can't remember. It might have been the 67 war. I'm not sure. I get them mixed up in my mind.
Yeah, Yom Kippur.
Yeah, it could be. There's been multiple wars. I think there was 71 and 76 and
Yeah.
82.
The one in 71, they had a hard time. It was.
Yeah, the one for, well, all of them were pretty miraculous how they survived and even dominated with the Lord's help, because they really shouldn't have. It was like 10,000 to 1 odds, like 10,000 soldiers and planes for every one of Israel's. And all the news was already just touting their defeat. And there's so much even people are using this Ukraine war as an excuse for anti-Semitism. I was playing chess online, and it has this chat live feed comments thing on the side, and they're talking about the Ukraine war and stuff. And people are saying, stop the war, stop the fighting, all this. And then one guy says, yeah, stop the wars, just attack Israel. I'm like, what?
Where did that come from?
Yeah, this anti-Semite just has to spout his, all wars are bad except if you attack Israel. Then
I
it's
remember
good.
close to 20 years ago, you talked about them finding oil in Israel, and you know what they have, and they started building a pipe up through Cyprus.
To Turkey?
No, Cyprus is an
Oh,
island.
the island.
Cypriot. It's called the Cypriot pipeline. And I thought, wow, Chad, have you heard about that?
Well, I've heard they've found some oil and gas. Yeah. But one of them, there's some prophecy like when I think it's when, who is it? Jacob is blessing his sons, and one of them talks about blessings of oil and blessings of the deep. And so I think one of the oil companies in Israel took that to heart and started drilling around there and found some oil.
Yeah. Well, they just recently talked to Germany. Germany has had a 180. They had Nord Stream 2 that they were trying to get shut down. Well, there's also a Nord Stream 1 that's been going for a while. And Israel called up Germany and says, we will help you supply you with oil if you'll help us complete this pipeline. And Germany's saying, darn tootin'.
Wow. That's quite the interesting thing.
Yeah.
Verse 17, and the land of Judah will be a terror to Egypt in the day of the Lord, in the tribulation period. We see it even now that they are afraid of Israel's military. Everyone who makes mention of it will be afraid in himself because of the counsel of the Yahweh of armies, which he has determined against it. What does that mean, the last part?
This is Isaiah 19.
We're in Isaiah 19:17. So what's the counsel that God has determined? It's his plans. God's plans for Egypt and Judah. His predetermined plans, or the New Testament calls it foreknowledge. His foreknowledge is his predetermined plans, what he causes to happen. So God, and how does God have counsel if he's just one? How do you have a council with just one person? Like,
Three in one.
right. There's one God, but there's three persons. And they communicate with each other and have a council and decide things. They made plans before the foundation of the world. Chosen in him before, Ephesians 1 says we were chosen in him before the foundation of the world. And it's against it. He's determined against Egypt. Verse 18, in that day, so second time, in that day. He's going to keep repeating this over and over. I think it's at least 5 times in the second half of the chapter. In that day, 5 cities in the land of Egypt will speak the language of Canaan, and swear by the Yahweh of armies, one will be called the city of destruction. So in that day, there's 5 cities in Egypt, and they'll speak the language of Canaan. What would that be?
Well, the Canaanites had a language that we don't know where they came from, actually. Some say Minoans.
Yeah, I think I'd have to look it up, but
They're Phoenicians. They became Phoenicians, the Phoenicians.
yeah, I think there is something about, well, I think they're descendants of Ham, I believe, and probably came from Egypt. Well, Ham went to Africa, west of the Dead Sea, or 3 of his sons did at least.
There was a lot of commerce between Minoa and ancient Egypt.
And that's Put in the North Egypt coast area.
Yeah.
And Mizraim, which is Egypt, the father of Egypt, those are grandsons of Noah. And then, what's the last one? Cush, Ethiopia. Cush is pretty much the rest of Africa. So there were those 3 sons of Ham that populated Africa, and I believe it says the Canaanites came out, or descendants of Ham too, although, you know, others may have joined them and mixed and come from various places or whatever. That happens everywhere. Yeah, the table of nations is in Genesis 10. In fact, I wonder if I could find Canaan real fast.
I'm pure Viking.
Genesis 10. Canaan. Okay, I have a map here that says descendants of Ham, and that's, Put, Egypt, Cush, the Philistines. Is that what we were talking about? Philistines or Canaanites? Oh, Canaan too. The Amorites, Canaanites, and Philistines are also descendants of Ham. You see, the sons of Shem, well, that's Shem. Where's Ham? I'm in Genesis chapter 10. So we've got, where does Ham start? 10:6. To the sons of Ham were Cush, that's Ethiopia, Mizraim, that's Egypt, Put, that's northern Africa, and Canaan. Canaan. This is a direct grandson of Noah. Noah, Ham, Canaan. And then, verse 15, Canaan begot Sidon, his firstborn, and Heth, which is the father of the, guess what? Who is Heth the father of? The Hittites. Hittites, and he begot Sidon too, which is a city in Lebanon. So there's the origins from the table of nations from Noah's family.
But what about genetics?
Well, there's tons of research being done on that, especially by the Answers in Genesis scientists. They're following the Bible, they're following genetics, they're following language patterns and migrations, and they're finding out lots of fascinating stuff, like a bunch of India DNA in what's it called? UK, United Kingdom, England. Yeah, there's all kinds of stuff, but this is the way it started. It doesn't mean people haven't moved around a whole lot since then, but that's the way it started. And you know what Cush means is dark face. And I've seen old maps that had Ethiopia being just everything under Egypt, and put all of, like, in other words, take off the top strip, and most of Africa is called Ethiopia in some of the ancient maps. Also, the other synonyms would be the Nubians. 19, verse 18. So they'll speak the language of Canaan. Well, back then it was, I guess, Canaanitish or whatever when the descendants of Ham. But we're not talking about back then. We're talking about the day of the Lord. And what do they speak in the land of Canaan now? In that day, in the day of the Lord, cities in Egypt will speak Hebrew, whole cities, and swear by the Yahweh of hosts. In other words, that also helps confirm that it's not talking about ancient Canaan. They're following the God of Israel. They're following the Yahweh of armies. Hey, James. And so they're speaking Hebrew in these Egyptian cities, and they're swearing oaths, making promises and vows in the name of Yahweh. That's part of the Ten Commandments. That's what it means. Don't take the name of the Lord thy God in vain. It's talking about swearing. Israelites would swear oaths or vows in the name of Yahweh. And
not keep them.
Yeah, and then if they didn't keep them, God held them accountable.
Which is why in the New Testament it's like, just don't even go there.
Yeah, Jesus said it's better not to swear in the name of God than to swear and not be able to keep it. Mm-hmm. So just let your yes be yes and your no be no.
Because we as humans have so little control. Sometimes
They're
back on.
And
Hello, Facebook friends.
Hello again, Facebook friends. We're back in Isaiah 19, verse 18, talking about in that day, the day of the Lord's return, in the tribulation period, it sounds like, or the kingdom. Actually, I think it's jumping to in the kingdom period, because it sounds good, like they love the Lord now. They're following the Lord. They're worshiping the Lord. They're speaking Hebrew. I believe there's another verse that talks about the pure language being restored, and sounds like everyone on earth will speak it in the kingdom. And a lot of people think it's Hebrew, just like here, just like this.
Can you jump to the good part?
Jump to the good part. The city one
of
will be
destruction.
called the city of destruction.
Yes.
Paul's waiting for the decimation.
Decimation means 1/10 of the people are killed. Destruction means everybody.
Now, what does that mean? I guess it means that maybe in the tribulation that 1 out of 5 Egyptian cities is judged and destroyed by God. Or, in the ancient past, in fulfilled prophecy after Isaiah's time, there was the Assyrian captivity, or I don't know if captivity is the right word, but conquest of Egypt in 711 BC. We'll get to that a little later.
Slurp that up.
But in the day of the Lord, slurp that up.
7-Eleven.
7-Eleven.
Yeah, 711 BC. Okay. It'll be called the city of destruction. And I'm not exactly sure what it's talking about. And there is other translation possibilities here, because the other ancient translations say, let me see here. It is so tiny, I have a hard time reading it. The city of the sun, or the Septuagint reads literally the city of righteousness, which would be a good thing, that's as opposed to the city of destruction, which I don't know. I kind of think city of righteousness fits the context of the kingdom better, but city of destruction fits the context of judgment, so I don't know.
That's it there.
Verse 19. What are you looking at, a Hebrew word or something?
No, it just says righteousness, acidic. Literally, righteousness, acidic. Septuagint. Never mind, go ahead.
Really righteousness.
Yeah, what the connection, I don't know.
Verse 19. So some of your translations say something different. You know why? There's some textual variance there. In that day there will be an altar to Yahweh in the middle of the land of Egypt. In the midst of the land of Egypt, and a pillar is the Great Pyramid of Giza. We've been watching this Bible conference on the Great Pyramid of Giza by Randy White. Randy White. He has a whole series. He just did live a few months back on the Pyramid of Giza, and it's fascinating. It's like the oldest man-made structure in the world. It was before the Egyptians, And we don't know who built it. Possibly Job. There's a little bit of evidence for that. The shepherd king from the east who was very wealthy.
So you think that it's older than the Sphinx?
Yes, it's older than all the pyramids. All those are just wimpy copies that don't even measure up in any way. Not size, not structure. This thing's amazing, and it's got the measurements of the universe in it. It's got like the distance to the sun and the rotation of the earth and the measurements around earth and pi and all these different things that they shouldn't have known back then. It's got all these measurements of the universe that seems to show that the creator gave this information to someone like Job, the oldest book in the Bible, maybe Job, the ancient Job. And then the description of him fits the description of Job, a rich king from the east who was a big shepherd, had lots of sheep. So maybe, but this is talking about maybe this is new though. Maybe this is built in the kingdom, an altar to Yahweh in the middle of the land of Egypt. So will the temple in Jerusalem, Messiah's temple, be the only place they can worship and make sacrifices? No, I think it'll be the primo place, the ideal place, because Jesus is there, right? But there'll be an altar to Yahweh in the midst of the land of Egypt. People will come there, or especially the Egyptians, and a pillar to Yahweh at its border. Someone said, what are those pillars they have in Egypt right now? They're like skinny pyramids.
Like the Washington Monument,
Obelisk.
basically.
Obelisk, yes, obelisk. But those are, maybe it'll be a cross as you cross. There's a big cross that says the altar to Yahweh this way, or a sign, go worship him there. And if they knocked off, the original Great Pyramid of Giza it was covered in white. Then you'd have a really nice altar to make sacrifices on that you could see from hundreds of miles away.
If you can get up there to get your sacrifice up to the
Right.
top. That's what helicopters are for.
Right. Could you imagine that when that was built, it would just blind you
Lions
from
with
miles away. All that white alabaster coating.
Yeah.
It's massive. It's still, one of the wonders of the world. It's fascinating study. In the 1800s, Christians would have, they have Bible conferences and revivals and tent meetings. They would have these about the Great Pyramid of Giza all the time in the 1800s. It points to God, him giving, as the divine architect of the universe, giving the measurements from here to the sun and the distance around the sun and the Earth's rotation and size and all kinds of crazy math in that pyramid. Verse 20, and it will be for a sign and for a witness to the Yahweh of Egypt, for they will cry to Yahweh because of the oppressors. Now I think it's flashing back. It's jumping back and forth between Egypt in the kingdom, Egypt in the tribulation. Good part is Egypt in the kingdom. Bad part is Egypt in the tribulation. For they will cry out to us in Egypt. What's the
Assyria.
empire? Yeah, that's coming through and plowing everyone. Yes, Assyria. But in the tribulation, it will be the forces of Antichrist. It says, I think it's maybe Daniel 11, and there's another place in Joel it talks about Egypt too. But sounds like the king of the north, being Antichrist, comes down and puts down 3 kings, including Egypt, to help Israel, which seems odd at the beginning, to help Israel, because he guarantees their peace and security at the beginning. And then they're like, who can make war with this guy? And he's like a Messiah figure. Oh, he puts down Egypt. So they're afraid of Israel because Antichrist is fighting for Israel at the beginning. They made this covenant with death. So the Lord or maybe they saw what Antichrist, how he put down. Russia will be nice if you give
Russia will
them
guarantee
give them
your
all your
safety.
nukes and missiles and jets and everything. For it's too bad we couldn't give them jets because our president's too cowardly. For they will cry to. I don't mean our president. I mean the president non-elect.
Brandon? Are you talking about Brandon?
For they will cry out to Yahweh because of the oppressors, and he will. Now listen to this. This is very messianic. And he, Yahweh, will send them a savior and a mighty one, and he will deliver them. Well, who does
Sounds
this?
kind of familiar.
Yeah, who does this sound like? This sounds like what Israel is going to do in the tribulation. At the end of the tribulation, they cry out to Messiah, they cry out to Jesus Christ, and he comes and saves them from the Armageddon, from the forces of Antichrist. Israel's under siege, Jerusalem's under siege. But apparently Egypt does the same thing. They turn to Jesus Christ in mass and ask him for deliverance, for spiritual salvation and physical deliverance. Okay, can we tone it down a bit? I'm getting distracted
Sorry, Chad.
by all the hippie break. He will.
I feel like a throwback to my childhood here.
Paul's getting all nostalgic with all the people dressed
Trying to
for the
think, where did I
hippie
put my peace
dance.
symbol?
Verse 21. Perform it and keep it. They're going to be very devout. They're going to be following Yahweh, speaking Hebrew, making sacrifices to him. Some people say, oh, this, you dispensationalists are all wrong for taking the Bible literally because they couldn't possibly be making sacrifices in the kingdom because Christ is the once for all sacrifice. Yes and no. He is the permanent sacrifice for sin, but there were other kinds of sacrifices. Thanksgiving offerings, memorial offerings. Christ is going to have the new covenant, the law according to the new covenant, and this is how they've turned to Messiah. He's forgiven their sins. Verse 22, and Yahweh will strike Egypt. He will strike and heal it. See, he will strike it with Assyria and in the tribulation period, but he will also heal it. They will of the stream that goes out of the throne of Jesus Christ, and the leaves fall in the river, and it goes into the Mediterranean and into the Dead Sea, and it makes it alive with fishing again. And it said the leaves are for what purpose? Healing. For the healing of the nations, including Egypt. So why would they want to go to Israel? For the healing of the nations and to worship Jesus Christ in person. And the rest of the year round, they've got an altar to continue making sacrifice. The revelation of the Old Testament, the Gentiles are required to come to Jerusalem once a year for the Feast of Tabernacles, to have a camp out and barbecue to the Lord. And it'll be wonderful. And if people disagree, then God will disagree to give them rain. Verse 23, in that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria. And I didn't finish talking about 22. So the striking and the healing, it's kind of like, God's the Father, right? And, sometimes a child has to be disciplined. So there's the spanking. But when it's done in love, what follows the spanking?
Lollipops.
A hug, right? A hug, reconciliation. That's the whole point, is correction and reconciliation. And Benjamin's looking around like, where was mine?
You have to repent.
He was
first.
very bad boy, very bad.
You have to admit that you were wrong, then you get the
Maybe
hug.
that's why he's such a respectful, well-behaved person now. 'Cause
No, he's a good boy. He's been jamming. In that day there will be a highway from Egypt to Assyria, and the Assyrian will come into Egypt, and the Egyptian into Assyria, and the Assyrians will serve with, and the Egyptians will serve with the Assyrians. Serve whom?
In the
Israelites?
HCSB it says worship with Assyria.
Yeah, worship. Yeah, HCSB says worship instead of serve. So what did you say, Paul?
Yeah, the Israelites.
Well, I think they're serving or worshiping Yahweh, the God of the Israelites. Yeah, it's so there's going to be this highway. What was the king's highway used for?
Killing.
Killing, and what else?
Commerce.
Battles? I can't hear you.
Battles.
Battles. Okay, commerce. Yeah. So when they had peace, I guess it would be, there was a thing called the King's Highway. It went from let me see. Egypt up by the Jordan River and then into Assyria. So it went like an S pattern, and the king, when Assyria wanted to come and conquer, they'd come down through there and attack Egypt, and I suppose Egypt could do the same. But when they had peace, there would be commerce going, and this right here, this word, Hebrew word for highway, means a lifted highway, a raised highway. It will be lifted up. So I imagine, like it being on a big high mound and having a great view from both sides when you're riding or walking this highway to go, and it's so they can do what? People from Asia and from Africa can easily come and worship the Lord. Come to Jerusalem.
Like a worship highway.
Yeah, worship highway.
Just like in Israel, they had the road that to Jerusalem and come from the north down to Jerusalem.
Right. It really is the King's Highway. Messiah being the King here. Mm-hmm. So, and they're going to serve Egyptian. I mean, these enemies, the Egyptians and Assyrians. Why would they? Other people that have. There's a lot of us here that, without Christ, we wouldn't have a whole lot in common. Same way at most churches, most assemblies. There's a lot of people that, what does this biker dude have to do with this knitter? Not much normally, but now they're chatting together about the things of the Lord. Having potlucks, and
He's got a hog and she's making a coat for it.
yeah, she's knitting him booties. Cool biker booties. Verse 24. In that day, well, he could hang it from his ape hanger. In that day, Israel will be one of three with Egypt and Assyria, and a blessing in the midst of the land. So in that day, in the kingdom, Israel will be one of three. One of three what?
Three.
A blessing in the middle of the land, in the middle of the earth. I think it should be translated earth here, because I think it's talking about the whole world. Because, see, these three are together, and it's like the center of worship and blessing. I think the curse is going to be rolled back, not totally lifted, but rolled back, and God will be blessing the earth, and it will all flow out from Jerusalem, from Israel, to Assyria, which would be back area, and to Egypt. It'll be flowing out from Israel out. And everyone will consider these three nations especially blessed. Verse 25, whom the Yahweh of armies, how I'm taking care of them. And Assyria, the work of my hands. They're like my pottery, my artwork. Assyria, the work of my hands, and Israel, my inheritance, my treasure. So I mean, that's really neat because Egypt's been a major nation, one of the oldest nations. I mean, it was around before Israel was, and that's where Abraham went there, fled there. Both Josephs fled there. Joseph, one of the tribes, and then the father of one of the tribes fled there, and Israel was born there and grew and became a nation, and then they were enslaved. And then later, Joseph, Mary, and Jesus fled there from the slaughter of the innocents when Herod was killing all the baby boys, toddler boys. So Egypt has played a major role in, and not all bad, in Israel's history. And they have experienced Yahweh. They've experienced his goodness, especially when Israel was delivered with the 7 plagues out of Egyptian bondage. Impending conquest of Egypt and Ethiopia, chapter 20. This is about 711 BC, and who is Tartan? Well, this is a title rather than a name. I believe it's a title of the second in command of Assyria. So he's a high official or commander sent by, or he came to Ashdod. And where's Ashdod?
I think you're like a lawyer. You never ask a question you don't know the answer to.
Well, I try. I don't have all the answers. I feel very inadequate in some places. But here we have Israel, and remember the 5 cities of the Philistines? Well, what was the capital, or the big fortress city? Ashdod. Think Gaza Strip. The modern day Philistines or Palestinians and who hate Israel. So you have Ashdod right there, just above the Gaza Strip on the coast. It's a coastal city, a port city. So we have
Near Tyre.
and
Uh-oh.
where were we?
We're going to
So-
talk about buttocks uncovered here.
Shh, Paul.
Sorry.
Here that Tartan came to Ashdod when Sargon, the king of Assyria, sent him. So there was sounds like I heard there was a rebellion in Ashdod against the Assyrians. Maybe they quit sending their tribute or taxes to them. So they had to come and go and remove the sackcloth from your body and take your sandals off your feet. And he did so, walking naked and barefoot. So, yeah, this sounds odd.
Hippie.
Oh, I remember this part.
Apparently, Isaiah was a hippie. No, actually, he was. What?
God told him to streak.
He was a prominent guy. He was highly educated. He had the biggest vocabulary of any of the writers in the Old Testament, maybe the whole Bible. He was well educated. He was. It sounds like he was welcome at the palace in Israel, so he had access to the king and the officials. So this was
So this would be like if John MacArthur decided to take his shirt off during a service.
a prominent guy, but he's been upset.
More like Jeff Bezos.
Why has Isaiah
Wouldn't be
been
surprised.
upset?
Well, I mean, he had to go around naked in public. That would make me
Well,
pretty upset.
He's upset before the nakedness.
Oh.
It's because of
People were
Israel.
not being.
Go ahead.
People were not being true to Israel's, or to God, the God of Israel.
Right. They were saying, okay, Assyria's coming. Who can help us? Who could possibly help us? Look to the left, look to the right, look up, look down. Go to Egypt, go to Ethiopia. Ask them for help. Are they looking up for help? Or are they looking around them for help? Right. They're not looking to Yahweh. God wants them to look to Yahweh for his help, for their deliverance.
Like one of those girls is just like, where can I find a boyfriend? And the guy's like, here.
I've been your friend my whole life. Yeah, but you're like a brother.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's
that-
the caboose for you.
So Isaiah speaking tells them, and I don't believe this is. At first, I thought it was total nudity, but I've heard
It
some
does say
people.
walking naked, though.
Yes, I know. I've heard some explanations of
Well,
this.
he does need more clothes than what he's wearing, and I think
Well,
that's the point.
he doesn't. He tells them to remove the sackcloth. Now, sackcloth. Be quiet.
Didn't they have loincloths?
So remove the sackcloth from your body and see
Be down on me because I have no history. I'm
and take
sorry.
your sandals off his feet, and he did so, walking naked and barefoot. So, removing the Hebrew word for naked can mean partially nude or totally nude, and the sackcloth saying like, well, take off your sackcloth and your shoes means that when he took off his sackcloth, that was being called nude, but he wasn't. I believe he had his undergarments, at least his skivvies, which wasn't uncommon for like people in the Middle East. They would, like workers in a hot field, they would often strip down to their skivvies and work a wrapped around binding. Wrap a sheet around your waist a few times. That's what it is.
Don't give the little girls ideas. For Paul.
We're getting too much giggling from the teenage section. I think we need to
Thank
move
you.
on.
Imagine.
We're all a little uncomfortable.
Verse 3. Then Yahweh said, just as my servant Isaiah naked and barefoot. See, if he was naked, he wouldn't have to say, and barefoot. Because, see, he's like, well, he had all his clothes off, but then he took his shoes off.
Wait.
like-
Okay, but this says, like, young and old. Okay.
That's referring to the
Oh,
Finish
that's
reading
different.
this.
Hey, it just
Just,
jumped out at me, Charles. Dad.
you're looking for the word naked.
No. I missed the hot springs, but I won't talk about it.
Just as my servant Isaiah, just as my servant Paul has walked naked and barefoot 3 years for a sign and a wonder against Egypt and Ethiopia. In other words, Israel shouldn't be. Israel is like a homeless man in rags, destitute, and this is who they're going to their advice for, a man in rags. That's like them going to Egypt and Ethiopia to save them from the Assyrian invasion. Verse 4, so shall the king of Assyria lead away the Egyptians as prisoners and the Ethiopians as captives, young and old, naked and bare. More extreme than Isaiah's nakedness.
This could be a
With-
thong, man. Come on.
with their buttocks uncovered. In other words, his wasn't. To the shame of Egypt. It's a shameful thing to be exposed like that and paraded around. That's what their jaws and naked, all exposed, and to their shame. That's how they'd be taken away into slavery, into another country.
You know, there was
That's what Hitler did to the Jews.
Yeah.
in the Middle East.
Took all their stuff, stripped them naked, and shamed them.
Put them in gas chambers.
People were saying like, how did they stop terrorists? And they said one way was to shame them by like if they tried to blow up a bomb, don't kill them. Basically, put them out there in the public square, in shameful, uncovered, and that was enough to deter an entire community from. Or
Where was that?
Well, you know that
it was
they
one
don't
of the
have
Middle
a-
Eastern countries.
They don't have a bomb strapped to their bodies because
Well, no, this is as like a punishment, sir.
as like a punishment
Instead of executing them.
instead of executing them.
So
it's
it's
like
public punishment.
public shaming, and it
Public
was like
shaming,
enough for that entire community.
I'm really not happy with collective guilt. That's what,
So Israel wait a minute, what was I going to say? So we're in verse 4. So shall the king of Assyria lead away the Ethiopian prisoners as captives. So Isaiah's telling Israel or Judea, don't trust in Egypt and Ethiopia. They're about to be taken away captives. You can't trust them. They're weak, or they're much weaker than Assyria. And right now, God's on Assyria's side. They are the rod in his hand. Remember that? That's an important verse in Isaiah. It's been a major theme. Isaiah 10:5. Woe to Assyria, the rod of my anger, and the staff in whose hand is my indignation. That's him waving his hand over. It's like a club, a fighting staff. The club of Assyria on to Egypt and Ethiopia. They're pretty much one now, because an Ethiopian was reigning over most of Egypt at this time, except northern Egypt.
Yeah, this is probably near the time of Pharaoh Necho. What do you think of that?
Yeah, 711 BC. So that's after the northern kingdom went into captivity in 722 BC.
But just
of
before
Israel.
the...
But before Judah, Judah's like 100 years later. They go into Babylonian captivity. Babylon's not even a nation yet. It's just a city-state, and Isaiah's predicting it's going to become a nation and conquer Assyria, and its fall as well. Go ahead, Paul.
I was just going to ask what their buttocks uncover.
Next verse 5. But they shall be
That's right here in the Bible.
They shall be afraid. Paul, the Bible doesn't use those kind of words. So stop it.
Glutimus, Maximus.
Yes, they were butt naked.
All right.
Can a pastor say that?
No, it tells them
Can
their
I say that
donkey
in
was showing
church?
that.
Verse 5. Did it cut
Yeah,
out?
it's live again. The internet's
It keeps on buffering. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry about the buffering issues, Facebook friends.
Hopefully it was just at the right time.
Hopefully you're
Buff
missing
part
the
out
bad
the button.
parts and getting the good parts. Isaiah 25, we're almost done here. Let's wrap this up. Then they shall be afraid and ashamed of Ethiopia, their expectation, and Egypt, their glory. See, Ethiopia was Israel's or Judah's expectation and Egypt's glory. They were putting all their hope in Egypt and Ethiopia to rescue them from the Assyrians. They thought, oh, if we can just form a NATO type thing, a United Nations, then we can stand against the big bully on the block. Verse 6.
Bear that bully.
You're talking about Russia, the bear. Verse 6, and the inhabitant of this territory will say in that day, surely such is our expectation, wherever we flee for help to be delivered from the king of Assyria, and how shall we escape? So, who's the inhabitant of this territory that will say in the tribulation or day of the Lord, our expectation is gone?
Judah?
Yeah, I think it's Judah saying, well, Judah will say we've got no hope from the Antichrist, because the Antichrist makes war with the saints, with the Jewish believers for the second 3.5 years. And it's not till, it doesn't sound like it's until near the end that they turn to Messiah and they weep between the porch. He does help them and save them both spiritually and physically. They're delivered. All of Israel is saved, as Romans 11 says. The third that survived the trib. Let's pray. Next week we'll get into the conquest of Babylon by the Medes. Father, your preservation of Israel and of Egypt and Assyria too, and how you're going to bless them in the kingdom, and there'll be a center and highway for worshiping your Son. Amen.
Really exciting
Kids have a
tonight,
reminder.
Jack.
Are you serious, or are you being sarcastic?
No, I'm being serious.
Okay.
We can talk about